Hello, I am Alexander Ferrando, the director of Kurimansuto here in New York. Welcome to the second Future Dialogues conversation, a series of talks between artists. We are very proud here at the gallery to be an artist-led gallery and be able to host these conversations between artists with the help of our friends at Casa Dragones Tequila and Inter. They will be serving drinks following the talk around 6 o'clock, and I encourage you all to stick around. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Abraham Cruzvillegas, who opened this extraordinary exhibition last week, and the great Julie Mehretu. Julie was born in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia in 1970. She is a world-renowned painter who lives and works in New York City. In exploring palimpsests of history, from geological time to a modern-day phenomenology of the social, Julie Mehretu's paintings, prints, and drawings engage us in a dynamic visual articulation of contemporary experience, a depiction of social behavior, and the psychogeography of space. She received a Master's of Fine Art with honors from the Rhode Island School of Design in 1997. Mehretu is a recipient of many awards, including the MacArthur Award, the Berlin Prize, Gunnar S. Mundheim Fellowship at the American Academy in Berlin, and in 2015 she was awarded the U.S. Department of State Medal of Arts Award. A mid-career survey of Mehretu's work recently toured at LACMA, the High Museum in Atlanta, the Whitney, and the Walker. Mehretu is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the National Academy of Design. Abraham Cruzvillegas' artistic process is deeply influenced by his surroundings. Rather than being defined by a particular medium, many of his projects are linked by the idea of autoconstrucción, a concept that draws from the ingenious, precarious, and collaborative building tactics he observed in his childhood neighborhood in Mexico City. Cruzvillegas takes an approach based on inventive improvisation and instability, which presents change as a permanent state arising from the chaotic and fragmentary nature of life. Through his work in sculpture, drawing, installation, performance, and video, Cruzvillegas reveals a close and constant engagement with the material world. Parallel to his artistic production, Cruzvillegas has cultivated writing as an investigative tool that merges history, criticism, and fiction. His lyrics and texts about art, politics, and culture have become a significant part of his practice. On Tuesday, May 16th at 1 p.m., he will do a live performance here at the gallery that is free and open to the public. Cruzvillegas received a bachelor's in education from UNAM in Mexico City in 1990. He simultaneously attended Gabriel Orozco's influential weekly workshop, the Taller de los Viernes. He is the recipient of many awards, including the Hyung-Hyun Prize and the Smithsonian's Artist Research Fellowship. He has taught at La Esmeralda in Mexico City and the École Beaux-Arts in Paris. His work has been shown in the Sharjah Biennial, Gwangju Biennial, Documenta, Istanbul Biennial, and the Biennale de Sao Paulo. He has been the subject of solo exhibitions at museums such as the Bass Museum of Art, Austin Contemporary, Aspen Art Museum, Kunsthaus Zurich, Art Sonja Seoul, Haus der Kunst Munich, and Museo Humex. In 2015, he was selected for the Hyundai Commission in the Turbine Hall at Tate Modern. So without further ado, I turn it over to Abraham and Julie.
Thank you. Alex, thank you so much. And thank you both to Jose and Monica for this opportunity and for the invitation to be here in conversation with you. It is an immense honor to be here in the middle of your work, even though this feels sinful to be in seats in the midst of this cosmos, but still, it's really an honor to be here with you. Am I rattling too much? So I just wanted to thank you for this exhibition. Abraham, when I came to visit you in Mexico City, when I was there for Nairi's exhibition, I came to your studio and you were in the middle of working on this work. And it was the first time you told me that you've had a studio for how many years? 8 years?
10 years.
10 years. So can you just talk to us about that a little bit and because 10 years without a studio is a decision. I mean, that's that you had your children and you decided not to have a studio, from what I understand, during that time. How were you working? I know you were working on this incredible book and others, and continuing to write and continuing to make, but can you talk about that period and how that led into this work, like as a transitory space or transitional space?
Yes, well, thank you, Julie. First of all, thank you for being here, and thank you, Jose, Monica, Alexander, Raul, everybody who's making this possible. I'm very proud and happy to have this show, to make this in the gallery in Kurimatsuto in New York. It's very meaningful, different ways, but I will not cry tonight. And on the other hand, just to break the protocol, I would not answer your question, but I would better read a poem that is very important at this very moment. It's a poem by Langston Hughes, and its title is Little Song. Little Song. Carmencita loves Patrick. Patrick loves Si Lanchen. Xenophon loves Mary Jane. Hildegarde loves Ben. Lucien loves Eric. Giovanni loves Emily. Natasha loves Miguelito. And Miguelito loves me. Ring around the maple, ring around we go, waving our bright ribbons into a rainbow. So this is Langston Hughes. And maybe going back to your question, I would say, I mean, this is where the title of the exhibition comes from. That's why I'm reading it. Then, now answering your question, yes, I decided it was not an accident that I stopped working in the studio. First of all, because I wanted to be with my children, with our children, that we were planning with Alejandra having children, and then I decided not to, when I was at home, I should be with the children. Then I did so. And then it also helped me to construct a new methodology for me that means working only inside, like making projects that would be or go more, let's say, conceptual, and then making all decisions and resolutions at the very end, 10 days before the opening of any exhibition. And so I did like that, like for some 10 years. And now that our children don't need us to change diapers or biberons or so, I can go back to studio practice, and I'm very happy. And I was very anxious. My body needed to navigate the studio, dealing with objects and tools and with my hands. Again, not a metaphor, but really and material, yeah.
So when you went back into the studio and you unpacked, basically, you had this kind of massive archive of objects, tools, stuff you've collected throughout the years from different places. How did you, because you kind of explained it to me in the studio, but it was still a very dislocating kind of experience being in the studio. It feels almost, there was a certain kind of precariousness to it all, yet it felt there was this certain kind of logic to the organization of the studio, which I think is an interesting place to just think about the conversation before we get into the logic here in the work. If you can talk about like that moment of like getting accustomed to the studio and the point of departure into this, whether it was the poem or whether it was the story of berries and copper. Like, if you can go into that for us, and then we can like get into the work here.
Yes, totally. Well, I think first of all that, we met there again in my studio in Mexico, Mexico City, and it was a beautiful opportunity to listen to your opinion there and while I was working, but of course it's not the same like being here now discussing with an exhibition. And of course this means as well, like chaotic as I am, to mention that these conversations held in the gallery are super important, are the kind of something that can bloom or sprout in different ways, as I think it's happening now. And yeah, I think at that moment when you visited me in Mexico City, it was still like a moment of using the materials that I accumulated for almost 30 years and things that were maybe considered in my own boxes, like leftovers from other exhibitions or from other projects, and that were kept for ages there. And then suddenly when I moved back in the studio and opened the box, it was a beautiful discovery, like a meeting with relatives that I didn't see for many years, and then putting them together to have their own dialogue in a micro-universe that could produce friction with whoever could see it now, like we are here doing it maybe. And these things, of course, come from different contexts and different environments. I would say both economical context or social and cultural context, like things that come from projects I made in Greece or in Morocco or in Istanbul or in Paris or in Mexico or in New York. And then when put all together, they become something else. And then this made me produce a little rule for making them in the studio using my proportions, my scale, my hands, my body, so to make them in a very systematic way, but again, breaking my own rules all the time. And of course, I decided myself to add a couple of elements that were there, different ways again, that are kind of the most important elements in the exhibition, that are blackberries and copper.
Yeah. So can you talk about pink and green? I mean, why pink and green
Yes,
for so
I
long?
wanted to, I mean, it's
You've been working with pink and green, what, 25 years?
Yeah. It's something that I've been, I mean, I wanted to produce myself a couple of colors, pink and green, that I've been using for some years now, since, I mean, this is a little anecdotic thing that I was interested in the work of Helio Oiticica, the Brazilian artist, and when visiting my dear friend Damian Ortega and Isadora Hastings in Rio, they were living there, I asked them to visit the samba school where Oiticica used to go to learn how to dance the samba. And then we visited, it's in the favela of Mangueira in Rio de Janeiro. And then we went, and once we arrived, I discovered myself that I was in a very similar environment that in my neighborhood in Mexico City. Then I found ridiculous, like traveling so far to find myself in the same place. And I also discovered then that the flag colors of Mangueira are pink and green. So I decided to make the color combination mine. So I've been using this in different ways for all these years. And now I decided to make the colors myself using different materials, and more specifically, copper for making the green, oxidating it, and pink by smashing or squeezing blackberries.
Where did the blackberry desire come from? What was the...
Well, both materials are meaningful.
Copper has a really, like, in this, like, you can't go through this exhibition and not think about the people who collect copper to sell it. Like, it's the thing that's stolen off of buildings, taken from places, mined for that reason. But, like, so it is, but it's also in your work as these coins, as these,
yes,
whether they're the American penny, the European 5-cent piece, Japanese,
exactly,
Mexican coin, what?
There are many layers in each material, I think, in my approach. Like copper, of course, includes these that you just mentioned that are maybe economical, but of course, there are some other that are like making coins out of copper made more, very expensive. So making a penny went more expensive than the value of 1 cent.
Exactly.
So they are faking copper for the pennies. And also in other countries, they have in Euro, they have 1 cent copper coins. And in Japan, there are some other copper coins, etc. In Mexico, we used to have the 20, the 20 cents coin that it's still in the language. When you say, se te acabó el 20, is that something, it's over. Anyways, the thing is that it's not only that. And like as you mentioned, like in Mexico, they steal kilometers of copper from the street, like cable, during daylight. And then they accumulate and send them, like pirates, I would say, to people who buy it. And this produces a change or a movement in exchange, like Wall Street, that's what I mean. But also, this is more personal, I would say, that
the desire to create your own color.
The color green comes from oxidating copper, I said, but I accelerated the process by using vinegar. So this is more like alchemical, if you want, and because in the long term it goes green anyways, but I wanted to get it faster. So I learned with friends who know about it how to accelerate the green. It's a sulfate that comes from exposing copper to outdoors. But then I used a torch to make it faster with vinegar. But it happens that copper is being always, not always, maybe not always, but since long time, before Spanish people arrived in Mexico, in the Purépecha culture, in the west of Mexico, where my father's family is from. They use copper in alloys, maybe with iron or with gold, to produce a tool, a little tool that was used for ritual reasons. That is a tweezer. They used to depilate them, like in a ritual activity, with copper tweezers. They held like big tweezers like this in copper as a symbol of power, the Purépecha people. Maybe this is a fiction I'm just inventing now, but it's true.
Wait, what is it? Wait, so they held what?
Tweezers, you know, like a,
yeah.
but they made in copper. And the greener, it was older, so it meant more power. Or more hierarchical something for a priest or for a ruler. And then this is why I went to copper. Maybe my grandmother told me this story and I believed it.
And then the reason for the red, the berries?
Yes.
Children
Yes.
having breakfast?
Also, my children and me, myself also, I love berries, all kinds of berries. And we have them in our table every day, every morning for breakfast, and we eat them like peanuts, of course. And, but once I read that these berries, most of them come from Michoacán, from the state where my father is from, in the west of Mexico, and they've been overproducing, exploiting soil, the land. Big companies that the brand is in your supermarket around the corner is the same brand. And all they say in the little blister, it says produce of Mexico. Yeah, and they are really, you can find them organic or not. The organic are tiny and they rot quickly. The other ones stay even out of the fridge long time, super juicy, big and shiny. You want them. You cannot stop. Those I used.
Like the berry that's leaning on top of the copper pipe when you first enter.
Exactly. At the very entrance there is a pipe with a berry. And then, so I found that the berry juice is super pink. Then I started playing with it with my hands. And it went like a message for me, like I had my hands like covered in blood. And I found this strangely beautiful. What it means, this. I mean, we maybe can bend the conversation into labor, but it's all about the environment and what we put in our mouths to eat, where it comes from, who picked it.
Abraham, I know it was really your children who were eating the berries like that and
Yeah,
covered in blood.
and having your
blood
exactly. Isn't it pleasure? Yeah.
Well, that's really beautiful. So one of the beautiful, I remember coming to the studio, and despite any effort I put to try and be like, oh, things, because your show was coming up very soon. It's like, oh, things look really good. I was like, what the hell is going on? Like in my head, I was like, you kept walking me to things. I was like, okay. And because there were so many of these little, whatever you want to call them, you call them models, sculptures, almost weird microchip kind of structures, whatever they are, they have this like, you know, I love thinking of them as sculptures and models, but also as this kind of other kind of motherboard of something else. But either way, they were all over the place, and some were in the process of setting, some were like, you were showing me where the berry juice was and the green. But when I couldn't make sense of what was happening, but it was this like form of like just material investigation. And talking to you, I realized every single, because you would like bang the tool, you were like, and it would reverberate, and you'd be like, break the record here, and oh, look at this long tail, this long leather tail. And you called them these things, like the tail of this piece. They were like wrapped up around. Then I walked in here, and I got here a little before the opening, and it was like an incredible constellation. When you're here and there's not a lot of people, and you have the net going around the room and occupying the space of the room, and kind of there's this effort, there's this space of delineation, but they live on the walls, they live hanging from these hooks that are kind of have an intense point to them. They're hanging like in this very ritualistic kind of way. And together they create this cosmology and this taxonomy, where then as you come close to them, you really start to think of them very differently. They operate individually, but they really operate also in the liminal space of their kind of, as Sohrab and we were talking about at the opening, they operate in this liminal space of their kind of, the thresholds between them, the spillage that exists between them all, and what happens in that dynamic. And they become activated in a very, very different way, so that what's happening inside of them becomes a different kind of conversation, and suggests almost a different kind of spiritual, like shamanistic, ritualistic kind of experience. And I'm curious about that, because that's something that artists talk about a lot, but people don't like to talk about outside of artists. Like it's a forbidden terrain in a way, and yet it's like this space of kind of a form of unknowing to get to a place of knowing, a form of like, so I wanted to ask you about that in the process, like how much of unknowing, how much of your process is this space of mining and excavating this history, but then also kind of putting together, like how much are you present in that, or is it this space of kind of, there's a form of other engagement with this materiality that's doing something? Because you talk about them as like these objects say things, like, and inherent in them, in each element of them, is an economy. It's not just an economy, but is a labor, but is also an intentionality, a use value, whatever you want to call it. These objects have things in them, inherent in them, but then they become something else here. They're detritus, and you're inventing something from that. But within that, there's this thing that changes one. That's what I wanted to talk about. Like how do you approach that from within the process of making?
Mm-hmm. Well,
I know that's a roundabout question, but you understand what I'm going to.
It's a very elaborate question, let's say.
But you understand where I'm going.
I would answer yes.
Yes.
No, I'm joking. It's no, the truth is that yeah, I agree different ways with what you said in terms of the liminal, first of all, because I produced, again, a set of rules for my own work, let's say, a game, kind of inventing a game. That is something, of course, happens for me in any new project. Yeah. I like to test myself changing, but also like witnessing transformation in objects and in reality and persons and so. But again, breaking the rules of my own game became very important in a ritualistic way, maybe.
Yeah.
Like trying to allow these objects to tell their own stories and to dialogue in this micro-universe or universes, so they can have their own dialogue, and then I become a voyeur. Again, this production, let's say, produces knowledge for me in terms of questions. And this economy goes into, not to talk about animism, but I love the idea of animism, yeah. Not in a religious way, but in an economic way, better. Like how people can discover or see through the works the way they are made, or what is the environment of each little thing in every work here. Like if it's industrially made, handmade, if you can call it a craft, and what's the economy of crafts? In Mexico, in Morocco, in Greece, in Paris, or in New York. And then coins, and then natural objects like leather. There are many, many leather strips that are used originally, for instance, to make sandals like this. You will find them all around. This is a different economy, different environment or structure. And then, what like this friction that happens with any artwork when people look at it. And that's the liminal for me. And that is the way maybe that I can break a bit the paradigm, or whatever we used to call the paradigm,
Right.
to create, maybe as you said, a shamanistic approach, or something that is not in my hands anymore,
Right.
but in your gaze.
But this is creative making, whether it's a writer talking about, you know, working on a novel. Yeah, like I think, I can't remember her name right now, but one of my favorite writers. Marianne Robinson. She's in a conversation talking about writing. She says, you know, it sounds a little bit like witchcraft, or, you know, it sounds like we're getting lost in this thing, but it really is. Like she really talks about getting lost in this room and having to invent these. Invent these. You know, get in touch with these characters of these books, and to really be able to invent, she has to be in this other space. And there's something about, like, I've watched you in videos working, and there's a space we go into, and in Montessori with young children, they call it flow, they call it a trance, whatever it is. It's something that all artists love to talk about, whether it's in rehearsed music, however we invent this stuff. But what I'm kind of interested in is, there's many people who can talk about the economy of how something is made. Like this net from this fishing village that you were telling me about. Pátzcuaro, yeah. And it's so like intricately woven to catch very, very small fish. Or these kind of rattles that come from, you know, ants.
Yeah, with butterfly cocoons.
And they're used in ritualistic dance to call the rain. But that form, this kind of, or this idea of like digging out a canoe, and in digging out the canoe, there's a whole ritualistic aspect to that because of its engagement within the larger planet and the kind of participating in this community, but also being willing to receive the gift of the fish that will be this food source. There's a way of engaging with the world that has a very different form of knowledge, a different structure of knowledge that is non-European, non-aligned. Mm-hmm. You can call it indigeneity, you can call it whatever you want to call it. There are these hundreds of forms of different structures of knowledge and forms of knowledge. And they're part of our DNA. They're embedded in many of us. And a lot of, like, you know, we were talking about this earlier, a lot of post-war European, we were talking about this with you, Benjamin, but it's kind of post-war European artists who, Dieter Roth and others, who were working with very kind of freely with these objects to try and make order out of a culture of disorder post, like, the horrors of the Second World War and such. That was the reality of the colonial context, whatever that context was. It was an order of violence, disorder, precarity. Many of the words you use in describing your work are the context and the social context that so many people in the world lived. We were talking earlier, they didn't need to go to Paris to get lost, as the Situationists did. They didn't have maps of the cities they lived in, no matter what. Like this, there was this kind of, or we talked about Mexico City, there was this kind of evolution of a way of mapping a space because of how you existed in that. I think in this work, what I'm really drawn to, you know, you can look at this and you can be like, it feels like it comes out of these forms of that other sense of knowledge. And I want to ask you, because I know for you, it's really this economic, like you see the economics and the form of labor involved in making this stuff. But what I'm interested in is, I think of the spirit of the person who made that is as inherent as the labor side of what they made, right? Mm-hmm. And so how do we deal with that socially? Where's the social political in that space where there's this other thing being conjured? Does that make sense?
It doesn't make sense, but of course I think it's perfectly nonsense. And
yeah,
that way,
exactly.
It's pataphysical, I would say, better.
But it's like, it's the effort of Dada. It was yeah. It's like a battling.
Because what you're saying is really punctual, it's very precise in terms of the need to escape from the paradigm of people in the Northern Hemisphere after war or during war, then to get lost in reality, like the Situationists. That's what
whether
you said,
it's whatever this
the
medium.
Or I would say myself, maybe the arte povera artists that needed to react to the horrors of war
Yeah.
But whatever they did was everything but poor.
Yeah.
It's art from rich people, with rich materials, expensive at least.
Or
So-
mimicking
Or
aspects
or
of
also the nouveau realist. I think
Yeah.
it's they represent the need to escape from, I don't know, you name them. And I like the work, of course. I mean, I
too.
admire very much the work of Robert Filiu or Daniel Spoerry or Dieter Roth.
it's in your work. It's
It's in my gene, of course,
Yeah.
but there are many others.
yeah. David Hammonds, Richard Tuttle,
Jimmy Durham.
Jimmy Durham. Yeah.
But I wanted to point out something more specific that you mentioned, like carving a piece of wood, a single piece of wood to make a canoe
Yeah.
in the region of Pátzcuaro Lake in Michoacán again. It was not just fabricating a canoe. No, it was a ritual activity of the community celebrating the possibility of sharing in a very specific economy. And it's still alive. They still do. There is a big gathering in town in Pichátaro, San Francisco Pichátaro. That's the town where they produce the canoes for fishing the whitefish that is endangered in the lake of Pátzcuaro. The community gets together to witness and to help the person who's in charge, who's kind of a priest. He's not a carpenter. Maybe we use the word we have in Western culture or paradigm to call him that way, or craftsperson. But in Purépecha there is a different word for it, and he's the person who makes the canoe. And it's a celebration, it's a festivity, and it means a completely different perception of reality and universe. I would not call it animist, I would not call it shamanistic, no. It's just that. It's a Purépecha way of making a canoe. The last show I made in Mexico City at Curimansuto Gallery, I used 3 of these canoes for a single sculpture. It's a large shape, let's say. And I wish I was naive in using any of these objects that are sunk in these sculptures here. There is a tablet over there, there is a USB card, there is a charger for the car, for your telephone, there is a little...
Tylenol.
Everything. And everything includes these stories and economies and structures and sometimes violence. In terms of the economy, that it means labor, production, efficiency, or craft, or art. Maybe I'm not. Maybe
No,
I
I
want to
think
say something.
okay,
Yeah.
I think that's really important. But inside of that, it's the leakage between all of those that is to me like where the potency lies. So the kind of spillage between these pieces and what is suggested by that, right? So the potency is not just in them and in how one engages with what can be asked of them or what happens in them, but there's an aesthetic proposition that's taking place in terms of what's happening in the threshold of how they interact. And I bring that up, I think, because I think there's a politic in that, right? Like Mexico is the country, the border country between Central America, South America, and the United States. I was going to say New York, but I didn't mean that. But a lot of people see the border like we're dealing with this activated border issue at this moment in the last 2 days, because the majority of the people who are coming aren't coming from Mexico. They're coming from Venezuela, or as we spoke about, East Africa, Southern Africa, through Brazil, coming, whether it's, and so that condition, this condition of the liminal, this condition of kind of being in this space of precarity on the fringes, which is fundamentally kind of feels like we're all kind of living in this moment of like, of unknowing in this space, and rationalistic Cartesian models of how things were supposed to work don't work. Like we're not negotiating that. This work is the opposite of that. This work is like throws all that on its head, but it's not doing that in search of nothing. It's not doing that from the same auto-construction space that I feel like you were working from before. And I want to try and identify how that's different, if you can, like considering this different social reality, but also this different way of generating this work. It's not coming, they're not self-making. They're not, in a way they are, but they're not like you have done in the past. Although you brought everything into the gallery and then you built the show. And you didn't know what was going to hang and what was going to be on the floor, right? So how did,
Well, there are different layers of maybe thinking in your question. And I would maybe start with saying that I have the first hand, let's say, source in trying to produce better questions about migration. Like this is Alejandra, my wife. She works with asylum seekers in Mexico. And she's been dealing with specific cases of people like trying to reach the promise of consumption that means getting to the US. But of course, they are escaping from maybe being murdered or etc. I will not describe this because you know about it. We all know. But I have this reminder every day at home. And I'm learning a lot from that, from speaking with Alejandra, but also learning and listening to the people she has to deal with, including the persons who have and offer a shelter for all people migrating, that if they are deported to their countries, they might be murdered. People in Venezuela or Haiti, Or so, and then, but this is one thing. This takes me again to the poem by Hughes, because for me, my understanding of this poem is not excluding nobody. It's including. And this is not a metaphor, not an allegory, but I try again in my work to include everything and whatever it refers to. And we are sitting here in a gallery in Chelsea. I know this, of course.
But you excluded yellow. Just kidding. I mean, just, or no, I'm joking.
Good joke. No, seriously, thank you, because it's an effort, It's not that I'm succeeding or I feel I'm accomplished nothing. It's just an effort to try to produce questions, that's it.
Well, so then that's something that I think about a lot, which is, are these then, do you think of these as, I love the way you talk about them, like I said before, of models, but do you see them as propositions? Do you see them as these kind of questions? Do you see them as, do they carry some other kind of, what happens in their kind of insular self inside of them? And to me, I think that the allegory to what you're talking about in terms of the border and in terms of community and in terms of sociality and that is super interesting. But that's a question I ask myself all the time. As artists, our agency is in the act of making. And it's in that space that some other possibility might become realized. So, but that's not necessarily a proposition. It's more an investigation. But it's also, again, it's like a way of trying to make knowledge from a place of not knowing and trusting. But in that not knowing, there's a deep sense of knowing. I know those are two contradictions and it sounds like Dada, but it isn't.
We know each other very well.
Yeah.
I love embracing contradiction. I'm a very contradictory, unstable, and my way of understanding my work is very precarious. But I embrace this as well. And then I prefer to say that in English, you use the term style for writing or saying something properly. And that's the way I'm trying, in terms of language, I'm trying to make or to write or to think questions better.
Right.
This is my work.
So that's what
exactly. And then it happens only in space. Which form these questions take in space that you can call art in our society. And that I think we share. I think we are not offering any answer to nothing, but sharing questions that are public, that are made aloud, and then people can make their own questions. So it should multiply the question itself geometrically.
Isn't the experience of the engagement with the work.
Approaching your painting.
Or your, yeah.
No? there is no pamphlet in your work. There is no propaganda. But it's, for me, my understanding, your work is highly politicized. And I enjoy that very much. If it's valid, it's acceptable to say that I enjoy your work that way.
Yeah.
I think it's my right.
But no, but I love that. But I think that it's the activation from this space of mining, from, you've talked a lot and you've made work for years dealing with detritus and dealing with what was cast aside and dealing with what it feels economically useless in a particular way, not economically useless, actually, that's incorrect. It doesn't participate in a particular kind of market economy, but it participates in a kind of recycling economy or building economy or self-construction, like you talk about this with autoconstruction a lot. In terms of this work, there's something else shamanistic about it. Like, I want to go back to that, like, because it's like sound is in it, like and then also these kind of strange microchips. Like, I was listening to this conversation the other day around AI and how so few people really understand what's happening technologically in all of our realities, and including those who are building this technology. And we don't live in a world where I'm who I am and I have a connection with who you are. We're all in the same room. We're like all of us in this room and then in many different rooms at the exact same moment. How do we negotiate this other kind of psychogeographic space? And in a sense, like, these feel like they're trying to call something else. That's what I want to like talk about, because that's not something that other people talk about, but artists talk about. So, and it happens in music, it happens in ceremony, it happens in what happens in a communal kind of effort to understand. And to me, it feels like it happens in your writing, in the way you talk about teaching, the way you talk about participating in workshops, the way you talk about participating in terms of in your writing, the way you talk. This dialogue is about kind of getting somewhere collectively, not individually. And that feels like the experience one has when one comes into here. So I'm curious, like how you activate that, how you participate. You said in like how does that occur when you're in your? How much are you making decisions? How much is everyone else making decisions? Because you told them move the sculpture.
Right.
You've given instructions, build the sculpture in the past, like.
Yeah. Well, I think there are two answers.
Maybe that was too many questions.
To your questions. That is, one is that I would say that, in fact, it's part of, and there are two answers that are the same. That one is that just Benjamin was asking me before we started this conversation about if I'm doing any more autoconstruction or not. And I said, in a way I am, and I think I'm very much I am. Because this is the way everything started, and everything goes back to that. That is where I grew up, in Mexico City, in a neighborhood in which everything is chaotic. And the way in fact, I want to keep this way of existing, my existence like that. And then it's not a methodology, of course. Methodology cannot be chaotic, or maybe, I don't know. But
of course.
And well, the thing is that it comes from that. This information is not autobiographical. It would be very weird if someone tells me, oh, this is about your childhood when you attended the school. No, it's not about me, but it's about the ways of making again. And then it's very much here yet. Benjamin, yes, thank you. And then the second thing is that in that kind of environment, you don't need to get lost. You are lost, as you said.
Yeah.
We are lost, like in Addis Abeba, like in Rio de Janeiro. We don't need to escape from our paradigm because it's already not paradigmatical.
Yeah. It lives in that illogical
space. So that's the way I arrived here with all these things to organize this exhibition, or to disorganize this exhibition.
But there's really sensitive aesthetic decisions that are made that participate in that feel to me that I respond to. And, like, this piece I think I respond to really intensely, and I was trying to figure out why this piece as opposed to this piece. I mean, I also respond, but, and one can think about that, like, I'll go back to David Hammond's heart painting tarp paintings, you know, with the paintings that he's made where they're covered. No, they're tarps. They're like painted, and then they covers them with the construction tarps that you see outside. And at first I was like, they felt so ritualistic, and they have this kind of ceremony to how they're put together. And yet they're really like what you see, like when you're driving and you're seeing this construction, you see these beautiful paintings everywhere. Like they're for every one of us. Like they're constantly participating in the fabric of the city and disappearing. And they have those weird smiley face cuts or heart cuts or whatever they are to let the wind through. And Hammonds plays with this language, right? This language that just is there for all of us. And there's the economic side of that. I'm not interested in that because as artists, we don't care so much about that.
It's there.
It's embedded, yeah. But it's, you know, okay, so he takes it from the street and he sells it. That I'm not so concerned. It's more how that object and the resonance of that in this space where you're doing that with something that feels like it's like trying to deny its object. It's trying to deny, like it's trash in a certain way, right? It's the remnants of a way of living or something. And yet there's this deep, I don't know, place. The liminal's inside there, but it's also in it. And I don't know. They're really. I was really moved when I walked in and I saw them in conversation with each other. Then I was like, okay, you're really a magician.
Yeah, well, no, I think there are two different moments of liturgy there in this process. For me, maybe I would use the word ritual, but in fact it was very not ritual, like breaking again its own rhythm and its own pace and its own rhyme, like using the same materials and the same process, like using plaster, first of all, with molds that are my size, again, my hand size, my body size, and then plaster has its own time. It dries very fast, and it goes super hot when drying, and then using wax, and then squeezing the berries, and then all these ritual moments broke its own rule. Yeah. And then here, again, I tried not to repeat. I promise, I tried. Any solution. Like navigating the space in a, I don't know, maybe it's something I like talking about, like trying to be transparent with my own lack of skills. So I have to show them. I have to show them and to make transparent the way I work. And this is maybe my ritual.
So there's something you said in one of the things I read in this magnificent book. If you don't have this book, I recommend it to everyone. It's, you know, artist writings are wonderful. And there's some really great ones like Rock My Religion, Dan Graham, and others. This is one of those. This is a wonderful book. So thank you for sharing it with me. But in this, you talk about, at one point, how many of you in a community, I don't know if it was in the workshop with Gabrielle or something else, talked about getting fully contaminated, like encouraging, getting as contaminated as possible, like when you're talking about being Mexican, and being and experiencing this kind of other, and these feel like contagion to me, like these feel like they're embedded with that idea, and I just wanted to ask you about that thinking, and how that, like right now we're dealing with a cultural moment where nothing works in binaries, right? Like gender, forms of reality, social space, the kind of speed at which we travel around the world, the speed at which images are shared. Nothing exists in this way that you can say, you're a communist or you're a capitalist. It doesn't exist in that space anymore. So what is that? Like, where is that? How do we negotiate that? And that's something that I was like, that I feel like I wanted to ask you about. And
well, maybe this is a confession, but literal. But I grew up with a liberation theology, and I think it's very meaningful for me, you know. And in terms of your question, because we were part of a very interesting moment, let's say in Mexico. I'm talking about like my generation. I was born in 1968, and there was a turmoil, like a big something happening that year. And since then, I think the word crisis became the most important term for my generation, and it didn't stop yet. And then maybe corruption would be the second one, but there are some others. So even like I can
crisis,
continue.
revolution, corruption.
My vocabulary is very limited, anyways. You know? But anyways, the thing is that as a believer, I was sometimes in conflict with myself as a child. But then I got rid of the idea of sin and I went free.
Got
The
rid
idea of sin, being a sinner as a Catholic.
a sin. Okay,
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
got it. Sorry.
Then, yeah, literally I went free. And I regret of nothing, including reading American poetry, reading, being influenced by Jimmy Durham, and like getting as much information as possible, embracing contradiction again, in a very, very, very generous, I would say. I grew up, in terms of liberation theology, in a very strong community of ladies, mostly, in my neighborhood, fighting for the rights for education, water, electricity,
Sewage.
land, and sewage.
Yeah. And what about then the Franciscan side of your father's?
My father was a Franciscan, which is a different way of belief, or the same, at the end it's the same. But it was all about, in his words, and not my father's, but San Francis, it was all about poverty. And a brotherhood or sisterhood with everything, everybody horizontal. That's my education. But I think it's the first time in many years that I use the word poverty.
Okay, I think we need to wrap up, but I'm going to ask, I have two more questions. One has to do with, and it's kind of a complicated question. I'm sorry to ask it to you.
Oh, no, stop.
It's, I feel like there's this history with a particular form of American art that I'll generally say comes from a very particular kind of cultural background. It is the one we're mostly taught in, which has a predominance of white male artists, right? But there's this history of American art and then also of post-war art where where you are leaving the family, where you're about reacting against your parents, reacting against the generation before, reacting against who you come from, where one comes from. And in fact, I remember even Dave Hickey one time said, anyone who talks about their parents and what they do, I don't want to hear about it. And I remember thinking, that's like most of the world you just lost. That's such an assumption. And it's interesting because I feel like whenever I hear you talk about your work, or even in your writing about it, you go back to this place of what made you. And you speak about your work always in this space of like how it's similar to you. It's always in this state of transformation. It's always trying to arrive somewhere. It doesn't know what it's doing. It's this this really playful but also earnest and really sincere investigation that's like, there's nothing about it that's like a joke. It's like really like it's like sincere, but it's also super playful and made from these like other elements. And I guess I'm asking this question, like, how does that participate in that cosmological kind of bigger taxonomy worldview that we're talking about in world building? And then the final question is about poetry and when you started reading poetry and how much poetry plays a part of all this, because it feels like it does a lot. It starts with a poem, the title comes from a poem. You talk about poetry a lot, you talk about poetry as points of departure for exhibitions, concepts. So I just wanted to ask you those two things.
Yes, well, first, the thing about referring to my experience, I would call it that way,
yeah,
with my family in a specific environment and economic context is very much a search, and again, it's a question.
Yeah.
Because it's about like the way, then I would extend or share this question with you, like about what's identity, if not an unstable process that is in process of construction. That's the real meaning of autoconstruction, the construction of the self.
Yeah.
That is a definitely unfinished process.
Right.
And then this is, again, precarious, contradictory, unstable, and non-productive. It's not efficient. That's autoconstruction in the way I understand it, the way it comes from my own experience. And this is
But
summarizing a big reflection a process of trying to unlearn who I am. And then the second part of your question, or your second question, is about poetry, isn't it?
Yes.
And I think it's I mean, the truth is that maybe I wanted to be a poet when I was a child. And I absorbed as a sponge the poetry of the generation of Langston Hughes in Mexico, mostly the contemporaneous generation. That goes along with another question you made, that is that this was a beautiful generation of poets that were not nationalists in Mexico a century ago. Javier Villaurrutia, Jorge Cuesta, José Gorostiza, Gilberto Owen, Elías Nandino. I was really in love with them. And all of them were homosexuals in Mexico in a very hard period for gay people. They were openly gay in a very violent period in Mexico for homosexuals. And Salvador Novo. And these were Langston Hughes friends in Mexico.
Right.
And I think when I was a teenager, I really wanted to be a poet. But I found myself not so efficient again. But now, you know what? And this is promotion. On Tuesday, I will make here a performance reading my writing as poetry. That is not poetry. I've been writing lyrics for songs. I know nothing about music, but I love writing songs.
No, nothing at all. Nothing.
No. I mean, I like sometimes to. Yeah, no. The thing is that I still write poetry, and that would be it. And I'm still waiting the moment to link my work to other poets. Last year, I made an exhibition in Los Angeles with Sean Regan there, and it was all related to Concha Urquiza, a poet from Michoacán again, and who was a communist and Catholic and lesbian in Mexico in the 20s. And she killed herself at 30 years old, because I don't know why. But her poetry is very eccentric and unique in Mexico at that time.
Yeah.
And it's a poet's poet.
Right.
Not so well known, unfortunately. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abraham. This word is useful. Thank you.